Hey there. If you're an MA student, you probably know that the world of research can feel, well, a little complicated. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down the major research approaches to help you find the absolute perfect fit for your own work.
So you're at that point, huh? The MA thesis is on the horizon, looking like a giant mountain you have to climb. But, before you can even finalize your topic, you have to answer an even bigger question. How exactly are you going to study it? It can feel a little overwhelming, for sure, but we're about to make it all crystal clear.
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How in the world do you choose the right research path? And this isn't just some technical decision you make. It's really about figuring out what kind of story you want your research to tell, and what kind of evidence you're going to need to tell it convincingly. So, let's start that journey to clarity.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. First up, we'll look at the fundamental choice every researcher has to make. Then we're going to explore the world of numbers and the world of meaning, each on their own. After that, we'll see how you can actually combine them, and we'll finish up with a really practical framework to help you choose your own path.
Okay, let's dive right in. The very first choice a researcher makes is between two fundamentally different ways of seeing the world. This is that foundational contrast that's going to shape everything else that follows.
And at its core, the difference is actually pretty simple. Quantitative research, it's all about the numbers. It asks questions like, how many, or how much? But qualitative research, that's about the story behind the numbers. It asks why and how.
Let's break that down a little more. You can see here, the whole purpose of quantitative research is often to test a specific idea and then generalize the findings out to a bigger group. It does this using numerical data from pretty large samples. Qualitative, on the other hand, is all about exploring and really interpreting things in depth, using stuff like interviews from smaller, more focused groups. So you've got statistical analysis versus interpretive analysis. They're just two very different toolkits for two very different jobs.
So let's take our first deep dive into that world of numbers, quantitative research. The main goal here is to measure, to analyze, and to explain things using numerical data.
One major type you'll see is what's called associational research. Now here, you're not changing anything at all, you're just observing. For example, a study in Vietnam might look for a relationship between how motivated students are and what their language proficiency scores are. It's just looking for a connection, a correlation between two things as they already exist in the real world.
And this brings us to the absolute golden rule of this kind of research. Correlation does not imply causation. You've probably heard that before. Just because higher motivation seems to be linked to higher test scores, we cannot say that one causes the other. It just means they move together. I mean, who knows? Maybe being more proficient makes you more motivated, or maybe there's a third factor, like amazing teachers, that influences both. Associational research is great at finding the link, but it doesn't prove the cause.
Now, if you do want to find a cause, well, then you need experimental research. This is where you, the researcher, actually step in and you manipulate something, we call that the independent variable, to see what effect it has on an outcome, the dependent variable. This is the design you use when you want to test if an intervention actually works.
This slide shows a really common setup, especially in education research. It's called a quasi-experimental design. So picture this. You have two writing classes. You give both of them a pre-test to get a baseline. Then, for say 10 weeks, one class, the experimental group, uses a new teaching method, like peer response activities. The other class, the control group, just continues as normal. Afterwards, you give both classes a post-test. By comparing those results, you can see if your intervention actually caused a real change in their writing quality.
Okay, let's switch gears completely and enter the world of meaning. Qualitative research. It isn't about measuring outcomes. It's about understanding the complex, sometimes messy, but always fascinating reality of human experience, and understanding it in depth. So what makes qualitative research tick? Well, it has some key features. It's naturalistic, which just means it studies people in their real-world settings. It's interpretive, so it focuses on what experiences actually mean to the people living them. It's also emergent. A lot of the time, the biggest insight's just going to bubble up from the data itself, rather than from some preset hypothesis you had. And this slide right here shows the real power of this approach. A quantitative study might just count how many times students speak up, and then conclude that a quiet class is a disengaged class. But a qualitative researcher, through observation and interviews, might discover that in a Vietnamese classroom, for example, that same silence can be a profound sign of respect and deep thought, a cultural meaning that numbers alone would completely, totally miss.
So,
What if you need both? What if you need the numbers and the story? What if you want to know how much and why? Well, that's where our third paradigm comes in, mixed methods research. And it's all about powerfully integrating both of these approaches.
And there are a few common ways to do this. With an explanatory sequential design, you start with the numbers, the quantitative data, and then you use qualitative methods to help explain those results. Exploratory is the opposite. You start with qualitative exploration to find themes, and then you use something like a quantitative survey to see how widespread those themes are. Or you can just do them both at the same time in what's called a convergent design. Let's look at a real example from a study on using blogs for peer feedback in writing classes. The quantitative part of the study measured what happened. It literally counted the number of comments students made on each other's blogs, and it statistically analyzed the changes in writing scores between drafts. It gave you the hard numbers.
But, of course, that's only half the story. The qualitative part, which used interviews and student journals, revealed why it all happened. Students explained that because their writing was up on a public blog for everyone to see, they felt a greater sense of audience and accountability. See, this insight explains the numbers. It gives them real meaning.
And that right there, that gets to the absolute heart of mixed methods. The combination of credible statistics and these rich human stories creates a much more complete and powerful understanding than either approach could ever get on its own. The whole truly is greater than the sum of its parts.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground, so let's bring it all home with a really practical framework to help you make your own choice. How do you actually decide which path is the right one for your project?
Listen, if you take away just one single thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this. Your research question is king. It has to come first. You don't pick a method you think is cool and then try to fit a question to it. No. You start with what you need to know, and your question dictates the method you use.
And this framework makes it super practical. If your goal is to test an intervention, like does peer feedback improve writing, then you're going to need an experimental design. But if your goal is to explore an experience, something like how do students feel about using AI feedback, then you absolutely need a qualitative approach. Just let your goal and your question be your guide.
So as you get started on your own research journey, I want to leave you with this one final thought. Don't just ask yourself, what methods should I use? Instead, try asking yourself this: what story does my research need to tell? Is it a story of numbers and effects? Is it a story of meaning and experience? Or is it a story that really needs both to be truly and fully understood? The answer to that question, that will lead you down the right path.